The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome, everybody, to the web conference, Investing in Clean Energy for Campuses and Endowments. Very honored to be here moderating today with a great panel. And first want to acknowledge the Intentional Endowments Network that's putting on the web conference. They have worked over the past year and a half to develop a new white paper on investing in clean energy for campuses and endowments, and that will be the context for this web conference. So I'll start with a few logistical items. You should all be in listen-only mode, and you can ask questions throughout today's web conference by submitting a question in the questions field on the sidebar. So it should be your go-to webinar control panel, and you will see a questions field. At any time you can submit a question, and we will address those as appropriate. The webinar will also be recorded, so you should know that, and made available through the Intentional Endowments Network website and the Midwest Renewable Energy Association websites after the web conference is closed. So as a bit of introduction for me, my name is Nick Hylla. I'm the Executive Director of the Midwest Renewable Energy Association. We're a nonprofit based in Wisconsin that has been focusing on renewable energy deployment for the last 28 years, and recently has received funds through the U.S. Department of Energy to focus on the university market and help facilitate more direct investment in solar projects on behalf of universities, which again is the topic of today's web conference. I will be joined today by a number of experts in the field, three panelists, John Chaimanis, co-founder and managing director of Kendall Sustainable Infrastructure. John will be focusing a little bit on the context of clean energy investments and also the private equities market. Ken Locklin, Managing Director at Impax Asset Management, will be focusing on public equities. And then Chris O'Brien, Director of Higher Education Programs at Altenex, will be talking about power purchase agreements and direct investments on and off campus. So for a little context about the white paper, if you haven't had a chance to look at the white paper, please do so. You can go on the Intentional Endowments website and download the white paper for free. The purpose of the white paper is really to begin a conversation about the societal and financial benefits of clean energy investments and explore the barriers to such investments. It is a good time to do this. As many of you, I'm sure, are familiar, nearly 700 institutions in the U.S. have committed to climate neutrality and made significant investments in on- and off-site renewable energy and energy efficiency projects. University endowments now manage over $528 billion in assets. For some context, the clean energy asset investment space has grown from $62 billion in 2004 to $349 billion in 2015, so that you can see that the assets managed by U.S. universities alone are more than the entire investment portfolio in the clean energy space and can have significant influence in market growth. We see some pretty significant trends appearing just in the last 5 years in renewable energy. If you compare, for example, just looking at the solar market, if you compare 2015 to 2016, we will install 85% more solar energy this year than last, and 70% of all that capacity will be investment from utilities themselves. They are not the only investor in this space that's committing big. American corporations are leading the investment planning space. They, for example, formed a Renewable Energy Buyers Alliance led by some major corporations that are planning to install 60 gigawatts of renewables by 2015. And that would be pretty much double what's currently installed in the entire United States today. And these assets are taken serious by all the utilities investment classes, and they are leading the U.S. in new generation. So if you look at PV and wind new electrical generation capacity added in the U.S. that's more than the oil and gas industry and has been throughout 2015 and 2016. So the white paper not only addresses some of these trends, but also looks at, and not only in solar, but also in wind, hydropower, biofuels, fuel cells, energy efficiency, storage, combined heat and power, and even electrified transportation. And it looks at some of the challenges in this space, including concerns about financial performance, organizational communication among decision makers, market regulations, lack of suitably structured investment opportunities for endowments, tax law, familiarity with such examples, and even provides peer examples that the group can follow. The white paper has had a breadth of peer review, including representatives from the university space, the investment space, renewable energy, and across the country. It's a good first step, provides great context, and today we'll bring some of that context to light with presentations by our panelists. So a little logistics on how we have organized the web conference today. Each panelist will give about a 10-minute introduction to their specific area of expertise, and then we'll allow for about 10 minutes of audience participation, question and answer in between. And then we should have about 10 to 15 minutes at the end of the web conference for open discussion. So barring any questions or reservations, we'll jump right in. So I'd like to hand the web conference over to John Chaimanis from Kendall Investments to give us a little context of activity in the clean energy investment space and specifically opportunities in private equity. So John, welcome.
Thanks, Nick, and it's a pleasure to be here with all these other esteemed panelists. Kendall Sustainable Infrastructure is a private equity firm that invests in real assets, in the projects themselves, in order to create very attractive regular cash flows, cash distributions to our investors. We do that by owning these projects through private vehicles. These projects have the right to sell power under 20-year contracts, and through the sale of the power, we create the revenue, which is distributed in cash. We've been doing this for a handful of years now, and we're affiliated with Kendall Investments, which has over a 10-year history of investing funds. I want to talk a little bit about private equity as an asset class and put this clean energy investments into some sort of a context for everybody, because they are not all the same. When we use the term clean energy, it really covers a very broad range of opportunities and investments with varying return and risk profiles. So I'd like to try to clarify that. If we could do the next slide, please. So fundamentally, as a population, we're driven to cleaner energy landscape for a number of reasons. You may be driven for personal reasons, desire to have cleaner environment, political reasons, to assuage, to stay clear of regulations that are coming down against particularly coal industry and polluters, or for business model purposes. Look, owning a power plant that makes electricity that doesn't have to buy a commodity is a profound shift in business model. You used to have to buy coal on a volatile spot market, burn it, and turn it into electricity. Now you don't have to buy anything. You could just collect the sun and sell it for electricity. That's pretty profound. As educational institutions, we want to affect change through spending our dollars. And we can by essentially voting with our dollars, either, and I make the distinction between operating budgets and endowment investing. I'm going to focus on the endowment investing, and I think another colleague on the panel is going to talk more about the operating budgets aspect of it. And then the last point is clean tech sounds great, but it's a very poor classification to lump everything into it. If somebody says, how's your clean tech portfolio doing? Or if somebody seeks to report and say, the clean tech portfolio is doing great, they are unfortunately lumping too many things together that really should be talked about distinctly. They have different business risks. Next slide, please. This chart that you're about to see has a continuum of investment opportunities. They could be public, they could be private. Most of these, let's think of them as probably somewhat private. you have a curve here. That curve is the risk of loss. A lot of people like to think about risk and return, and they talk about it in the investment world. But what they really should be talking about is risk of loss. Not volatility, but what is your likelihood of this investment becoming a $0 investment? Clean tech covers all these areas. On the far left of your screen, you've got a pre-commercial technology, something like a t-shirt that you could wear when you walk. It creates electricity and charges your iPhone. That's pre-commercial. Really neat idea, but it's extreme infancy. And 90% of those sort of ideas aren't going to make it. The ones that do, you're hoping to get an outstanding return, and you hope that one outstanding return carries the bets of the others. Venture capital and angel investing has historically participated in this space. Lower hit rate, hopefully bigger home runs. The next one over are greenfield development stage projects. Every one of these projects, and we'll talk about renewable energy projects as a distinct investment, they don't just happen because somebody says, I want a project. They have a very long development cycle with a lot of risk that goes into it. You need to get permits. You need to get interconnection. You need to do all these things in order to improve it. And many of those projects fall through. Some would probably say the hit rate is somewhere between 3 and 10 actually make it through the hit rate of somebody sees an open field in a wind project to the one that actually gets built. Next over, you see these clean tech public equities. It's a broader pool. Your risk reward is varied, but inevitably there'll be some risk of loss inside of there as well. Companies that went public that either for operating reasons or technology or scalability, maybe they didn't make it. A good example is like a battery manufacturer, A123, about 5, 7, 10 years ago. Great technology, a little bit pre-commercial, but they were public. They were kind of getting there. They ultimately didn't make it. But there are plenty of other successful ones. I mean, GE's Eco-Imagination program would fit inside of that very squarely. It's very successful. Contracted private renewables is sort of the next bucket, and that's what we do. And that's really owning these projects out of the public markets in a private way, and you have a contract. And when they're invested in at the right time, they perform very much like a bond, only you get a few hundred basis points, 500, 600, 700 basis points above what you're getting in bonds. And then on the far end is the green bonds market. It's the risk of loss is arguably very de minimis, although there is such high demand that we've seen compressed yields in this space, and therefore that's kind of what you're getting. This is just a framework to think about, to contextualize. If we go to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about a project and project development. This mountain represents the risk in a power project, a renewable energy project, from the 3 phases of development to operation. There's a development phase, which is taking it from an idea into getting all the permits, getting all the interconnection, getting the land rights, getting all your entitlements, selling the power. Just prior to construction is development. Then you've got a construction period, and then you've got your project finance period or your ownership period. The first half of this, up into the bright green line, is your development risk. And your risk profile goes up. You're putting more and more dollars into this project that may or may not get built. If it doesn't get built, you basically lose that investment for the most part. However, when you cross that green line, you have signed a power contract. And if, as the owner of the project, the developer of the project, you want to sell that power forward. You want somebody to commit to buy that power for 20 years. And once they do that, you take a lot of risk off the table. And arguably, at this point, it's ready to be built. Construction risk in these projects is there, but it can be controlled through proper contracting. And then during the operations, the risk sort of gradually decreases. You have more operating history, you have more reliability. The investment profiles at these different phases is materially different, and you should have different expectations. If you're investing in development, or somebody is telling you they invest in development, they are taking more risk, you need a much higher return. You need to understand there will be strikeouts. If you're investing after the line, it's a much more steady, much more like a bond. Can we hit the advanced button, please? You might have to hit it 3 times, so 2 more times. So there are these phases of life of a renewable project. When you invest matters. The last part is no 2 projects are identical. If somebody says, you're going to invest in solar projects, and they're all the same, and we're going to give it over to you, and you're going to do it, they're not giving you the full picture. It's an extremely complex, and you really need professionals to work with you in investing in these projects, whether they're acting as advisors to you, consultants. Look, I run a business that all we do is invest in renewable energy projects, and I have at least a half a dozen experts on speed dial at any given point in time. If we could go to the next slide. Just show the profile of investing in these through a private vehicle on the left-hand side, and what you see is an investment and then a very steady cash flow. There is no mark to market. There is no NAV. There is no market perception. This is a project that's built that sells power under contract. The cash returns are very stable, barring some operating risk. On the next, if you would just advance again, you can see what it looks like if you put these into a public vehicle. It had become quite popular to create these yield codes, which were publicly listed because people said, I want access to renewable assets. I like the idea of contracted cash flows. Well, what happened was they put these in a pool and then they put them on the stock market and they IPO'd. And this is how they performed. And the challenge is that you're creating this sort of hybrid product, which is not truly growth and it's not truly yield and it's subject to market perceptions. Now, arguably, these stock lines represent companies that own projects just like on the left. But for some reason, they were valued every single day at a different price. And that volatility is what we seek to avoid. If we hit the next slide. So inside of your investment mindset, this is the typical portfolio allocation chart here. Real assets, fixed income, hedge funds, private growth, global U.S. equity, and U.S. equity. So this is something taken from Cambridge Associates in 2013. If you advance just one, you'll see that in their 2013 report, they said that energy investments have been thought of as diversified growth and grouped with peers in buyout, venture capital, and opportunistic real estate, and then benchmarked against private equities. And these private renewable projects, that is really a mistake to do that. I think if you advance one more, they really belong much more at the real assets and fixed income because you don't have the volatile commodity on the front end, like an oil investment or a gas investment, and it materially changes the profile. So in wrap up, on the last slide, I just would reiterate maybe 3 points. Clean tech probably isn't an appropriate investment classification by itself. It's good to talk about it in a context, but not good to make a decision of I'm allocating to my clean tech bucket. You need to understand that there are different business risks in each of the various types of investments inside of that. Second, in principle, owning contracted renewable real assets can produce very attractive regular cash returns, but when you invest really matters. And that's really the third point, that these projects are complicated. You do need expertise. And when done right, they can be fantastic, but it does require a deep level expertise. So thank you very much. And I will hand it over to Ken, please.
Ken, before you get started, this is Nick. I'll jump in here. John, we may keep you for a few questions here. So I think maybe I'll get started. So John, you talked a lot about direct investments in contracted renewable energy projects, and I imagine there are a number of campus leaders on the phone that have some experience with that, and outlined in the white paper are a number of examples. And they range from direct ownership, acquiring the asset, installing it right on the campus, leasing asset, power purchase agreements, so signing a long-term power purchase agreement for an asset, setting up a green revolving fund, investing, as you mentioned, a private market vehicle, energy services companies and service contracts. There's all these permutations of how these investments work. Would you talk a little bit and clarify maybe how a university might appropriate money from, say, an operational budget versus the endowment in this context?
Absolutely. So your operating budget, the operating budget is an expense to the university. You are seeking to decrease your expenses. That is fundamentally why you invest out of your operating budget. And I use the word invest in the sense that it's both, you're looking at a pool of money and saying, are we going to build a new building? Are we going to replace the windows in our old buildings? Are we going to try to control our energy expense? In that context, out of the operating budget, you can choose to sign a PPA with a project. And if they give you a reduced rate for the power versus what you're paying today, and they lock you in a fixed rate or a small escalation, and that's a great hedge for you, that's a PPA, and that's what you do out of your operating budget. Same thing out of perhaps even building a project on your campus. That probably will come out of your capital operating budget. And you would look at your return on investment, and you would look at what is my avoided energy purchased costs. And there are different structures with which you can do that. It's the deeper you get into direct ownership on your own campus, the deeper in the grass you're going, and it becomes very specific. You will require tax advisors, you will require lawyers, you will require experts in permitting and interconnection and high level or detailed energy specific matters, which may be a route that you would like to go. And it can be quite beneficial to the operating budget. When you move over to the endowment, you are talking more about investing through private funds. You may choose to invest out of your endowment directly into a 5 megawatt solar project, a wind project, but unless you have particular expertise, that probably, you should probably get additional counsel on making that decision itself. So those are the ways I would distinguish between, using your endowment for real investments for attractive returns in your overall diversified portfolio, which again, owning assets the way I've described can create a very attractive cash yield. There are other investments and other types that you can potentially do, but it is much more focused on using that expertise that way. On your operating and capital budgets, those are your decisions.
Well, following up on that point, John, well, first I'll say I'm sure we'll hear a bit from Chris O'Brien on some of the points of concern and owning and operating a renewable energy project on campus or investing one on campus. But when it comes to direct investment from the endowment, can you talk a bit about the return profile of an endowment's investment in your infrastructure fund?
Sure. So what it would look like, there are a couple of charts I showed. If you remember, there was the bar chart, probably just one or two slides prior to this on the left-hand side. And really it would be, the way our fund is structured, and not all private funds are structured this way, but our fund is structured to maximize cash yields, cash distributions. So the investment profile is, it's a callable structure. We would call down the capital to make a capital investment. So we would identify a $2 million investment. We would call capital from all the limited partners, invest that $2 million in the project. That project would take 2 to 3 months, maybe 4 months to get built, and then it would start selling its power. Our objective is to distribute cash on a quarterly basis. We've actually distributed every single quarter since we closed our first fund. We anticipate to do the same on our second. And we're looking to produce somewhere between 7 to 10% cash on cash returns.
Great. Thanks for that clarification. And one final question here. We saw just yesterday that Bill Gates is launching an investment fund for pre-commercial R&D in the clean energy space. And you had talked a bit about the risk. We know, for example, that many current technologies are making very large strides in the investment space and in deployed assets. So can you compare the risk profile a little deeper than what you have of commercializing a new technology or just backing a company versus owning a commercially proven contracted renewable energy project?
Sure. Is it possible to go back in slides to maybe, it looks like it might be slide 7 with the bubble chart? So this fund that has recently come out, $2 billion, I think it's $2 billion, a massive fund. We're looking at the red bubble on the left-hand side. And these are folks that are looking to change the world through innovation, through something that has not been done before. They are looking to back the next Google, if you will, in an energy project or an energy idea. And 9 out of 10 of these are going to fail. There is, that's what we see with pre-commercial technologies, right? There are hundreds of thousands of startups to every 1, 2, 3 that, actually grows. It is from one perspective, look, you have to question, are these folks doing it for the returns or are they doing it for the impact? I think it's sort of one. Number 2, if they are doing it for the returns, is there a likelihood of deploying that much capital into the space profitably that are going to be successful? I think, Nick, you mentioned $349 billion in clean energy. $300 billion goes into project finance like we do, which leaves $50 billion. That $50 billion is broken down between IPOs, refinancing, mergers and acquisitions, private equity, early stage, and venture capital. So it's a very small market that they're looking to put a lot of money into. It would be fantastic, and I don't want to comment about the merits, but as a risk return, the risk of loss is quite high in that investment fund that they've come out with. It could change the world, but today, what is changing the world are the 300 billion that are being invested every year in these projects. That every time you build a new renewable project, one less fossil project needs to be built.
John, all great points, much appreciated. For those of you attending, you'll have opportunity at the end of the webinar to talk more with John. For now, let's move to Ken Locklin over in the public equity space. And Ken, please give us a good introduction of yourself. You have a lot of experience, and we look forward to hearing from you. Ken, can you join?
Thanks very much, Dick. Terrific opportunity. I'm very pleased to be working with my friends at IEN. Again, we're very excited at Impax Asset Management about the launch of IEN, founding members, and are very enthusiastic about how it's developed over the course of the last couple of years. Impax is a London-based asset manager which currently manages a bit over $6 billion of investments that are exclusively developed in the environmental markets and climate solutions space. We manage about a half a dozen different strategies now, a total of around 30 funds worldwide, and all of those are fossil-free from inception. So we are active in a particular element of the market that I think will be interesting for those of us on the call today. Today we're speaking specifically about the opportunities in the clean energy space, and clean energy consists broadly of two major categories. It consists of the renewable energy investment categories, like the ones that John was mentioning before, and also investments in energy efficiency. And energy efficiency investments can be anything from more efficient motors going into factories to electric transport. This is a major part of the broader climate solutions environmental markets arena in which we do most of our investing. It makes up typically anywhere between 25 and 40% of our total assets under management in any given year. So we pay a lot of attention to the marketplace, and we've been working in it for almost 20 years now. It's a difficult market, frankly. It's not a place where investors make money easily, but it's a market that has tremendous potential and where we see enormous opportunity. It's also a very young market. It is the case that there's still immaturity in some of the companies in the market as they grow. It's a market that is also young enough that some of its subsectors are impacted by shifting regulatory environments over time, although not typically on the energy efficiency side. And some of the original equipment manufacturers in the subsectors tend to be a narrow group, just a few companies dominating a particular subsector, and that can make them volatile and prone to fairly significant movements in stock price over time. That's also not true of energy efficiency, actually. So given all this, it's not too surprising that when we look at the results, as you can see from this slide, over roughly the last 10 years of investing in the space, it's a bit of a complex pattern. So let's look on the right-hand side of the slide, the current day, and start down at the bottom of the slide. One of the places you really wouldn't want to have been investing if you were starting back 10 years ago and buying and holding your investment position would have been in the global coal industry. That's the black line that's the lowest performing over the period. And you wouldn't have done much better by being in the global oil industry as personified by the Brent crude price, the brown line just above it. The next line up, the pale green line, is the performance of the broader renewable energy, the broader renewable energy index, the FTSE Environmental Opportunities Renewable Energy Index. It's a good broad measure of what environmental markets have done over time. And you can see that those companies collectively have outperformed the commodity holdings in oil and coal, but there have been long periods of time where one really didn't want to be an investor in the companies that were active in this space, in the specific listed equity firms that are active manufacturing some of the equipment that's used in this arena. We've had individual funds in our funds family, for example, that would have completely eliminated holdings in renewable energy for periods of a year or 2 years when the investment opportunities for those funds didn't seem appropriate. If you continue up on the right-hand side and you look at the dark blue or purple dashed bar, that's the performance of the MSCI energy index. It's mostly, almost exclusively, a fossil fuel index. So over the last 10 years, it has been the case that fossil fuels collectively, investments in that sector, has outperformed investments in the companies that produce renewable energy equipment. But those companies in the fossil fuel sector have also underperformed the broader market, and the broader market is exemplified by the next line up, which is sort of a pale blue dashed line. That's MSCI ACWI, a good general benchmark for market performance over the last decade. So clearly, fossil fuels as a class have not been an attractive investment arena for commercial investors if they were, again, on a buy and hold basis. If you look up above the performance of the MSCI ACWI listing, the dashed line, you'll see two lines very close together, and the top of those two is the FTSE Environmental Opportunity Index for energy efficiency companies. That's the green line. And it has outperformed over time the broader market index, and it has also just slightly outperformed the general index, the FTSE Environmental Opportunity All-Share, which encompasses investments across the environmental markets and climate solutions spectrum. So these are sectors which have performed well over time compared to broader markets, but they can be volatile, as we've discussed. And I think that helps us understand that investing in clean energy can be good investing and meet and even exceed broader market performance, but these investments have to be made with a great deal of care. Can I have the next slide, please, Jackie?
And maybe before you move on,
sure,
we can interject a question here. So it appears by that slide.
Jackie, let's back up, please.
That there's an opportunity in the clean energy listed equity area. And can you tell us anything about the actual impact of a clean energy investment made by investors in any of those funds today?
Well, I think if you look at if we think about the numbers that you and John were talking about earlier, about the enormous volume of investment that has been made in the deployment of clean energy generation, for example, in the U.S., worldwide, the companies that manufacture every bit of the equipment that produced all of those pollution-free megawatt hours of energy came from the renewable energy manufacturing sector. And those companies, those products were deployed and have, as a group, saved enormous amounts of emissions and other pollutants to the benefit of all of us living alive on the planet. On the energy efficiency side, we see very direct savings being generated every day by hundreds of important energy efficiency companies that are active in literally every sector of the economy, constantly coming in to produce new ways to do more with less in terms of energy usage. And that, again, just literally saves every one of us money every day from the more efficient appliances and systems and vehicles. Car mileage improvements over the last couple of decades have been really impressive, and they are slated to continue. So these investments are producing real impacts in the real world, and they can produce interesting investment impacts too, but they're complicated markets that need careful attention to effectively exploit.
Thank you for the clarification, Ken.
Okay, Jackie, back to the next slide, please. So Impax, as I said when we started the conversation, is active as an investor in the listed equity space in stocks. And we've been asked over time to help people understand it's pretty easy to see that you can invest for performance, as we saw on the last page, but can you also invest for impact? And investing for impact in a measurable way is harder in a listed equity portfolio because the typical listed equity company is engaged in a lot of different activities, some of which may be directly benefiting the environment or in one direct fashion that's measurable or another, but they may include lots of miscellaneous other activities. Siemens, for example, is an important company in the environmental market space, and it has organizations and divisions that are really active doing cutting-edge work in energy efficiency and renewable energy systems design and management, but they also manufacture a vast variety of other products and services which don't have anything to do with the renewable energy space. So it's a little difficult to see the impact of renewable energy investment in a stock in the way that you can see with the investments that, for example, John's wind or solar farms produce, or the wind or solar projects in which our private equity divisions invest. So we needed to find a better way to identify these impacts, and we spent a good deal of time over the last couple of years examining the portfolios of the listed equity companies in which we operate. And what it enabled us to do was to develop a disaggregated appreciation of the individual products that the companies in which we invest produce and sell out into the market, and the kinds of impacts that those products have in the real world. So on this page, we have an example from one of our strategies, the Impax Specialist Strategy, and we're looking at what happened for an investment that was made, a $10 million investment in that strategy. Strategy invests in a variety of environmental markets and climate solutions companies around the world. And we were able to dig into the performance of those companies and look at their operations and identify a variety of direct environmental impacts that are the result of those companies when they are in their ongoing normal business mode. So for example, the orange box on the upper left, we can see that there are net emissions avoided of 7,600 metric tons of CO2. Now, this is very different from a typical carbon footprint, which just looks at the amount of emissions that are produced. We're talking here about net emissions, so the emissions that are saved by the company's products actually deployed in the world, less the emissions that are actually used to create those products. And so this particular strategy was able to produce for a $10 million investor 7,600 metric tons of net avoided CO2 emissions. The same strategy at the same time was active in treating $10 million of investment, 645 million gallons of water, and was also treating or processing 800 metric tons of recovered materials. And the companies in which we were investing were also deploying equipment which generated 3,100 megawatt hours of clean energy. So it's possible with this kind of investment due diligence to identify the direct impacts that these listed equity companies can have. This is a process we have on an ongoing basis. It's actually validated by Ernst & Young for us. It's an open architecture which other investors and fund managers are welcome to utilize. And it does allow us, I think, all to see that there is this different way of viewing the impact of investments beyond the financial performance. So I think it's clear from my perspective to say that the clean energy transformation is clearly well underway today. The opportunities abound in the sector. And the good news is that careful investments in the clean energy listed equity space can be good investment business and can also produce significant improvements for the bottom line of the planet. And I'll just stop there.
Well, thank you so much, Ken. In order to make sure that we have time for Chris, we'll move on to power purchase agreements and direct investments and save some of the questions that we have for the end. So Chris O'Brien from Altenex, welcome.
Greetings, thanks. We'll just get the slides up here. Okay, you should be able to see my screen now. So my name is Chris O'Brien. I'm the Director of Higher Education Programs at Altenex. Before I came to Altenex, I was the Director of Sustainability at American University in Washington, D.C., where I was responsible for our climate plan and, among other things, all of our renewable energy projects. I came to Altenex because Altenex works with campuses as well as other large energy users to advise on and structure large-scale renewable energy purchases. So I work specifically with campuses on that, and recently we conducted a study that I'm going to show you some data from here about some trends in higher ed with regard to how much and how campuses are sourcing renewable energy, and then I'll do a little bit of a deeper dive on the strategy that we're seeing as the emerging preferred strategy of large-scale power purchase agreements. So just to give an overview of the space and the different strategies, by far the most common and longest standing approach in higher ed for sourcing renewable energy is what we call an unbundled renewable energy certificate, or REC. This is the unique documentation for the production of a megawatt hour of electricity, and the ownership of which transfers the right to make environmental claims associated with that electricity. So this is basically a market tool designed to catalyze renewable energy development by allowing buyers to find the lowest marginal cost of renewable energy certificates where projects are closest to being able to pencil out on their own. So it's been very successful, and a testament to that is the fact that renewable energy certificates are now very low cost. So I'll show you some data on that in a second. The other option, and these next two are where we'll spend a few minutes. The other two options are to have a direct stake in a renewable energy project, either on campus or off. So some issues here, this is generally kind of outside of the normal business of a university. So it's rather unfamiliar, and as a result can take quite a while for a campus to understand how to take advantage of this opportunity. A university could use funds from an endowment or from an operating budget or a capital budget to do this. One of the challenges is to be able to take advantage of some of the tax incentives. The nonprofit status of universities creates a barrier to doing that easily, and requires the involvement of a tax equity partner, which is feasible, but again, kind of unfamiliar and a little bit complicated. Typically, where we've seen this happen the most in the higher ed space is with small-scale on-site solar projects, sometimes funded by an alumnus donation, sometimes out of an operating budget, sometimes out of a student contribution, a class contribution, for example. Third, and I think most interestingly, what we see the most of are power purchase agreements. These are long-term agreements to source renewable energy from a specific project. They can be very financially attractive, both in terms of saving money on the actual cost of electricity, as well as providing a hedge effect, such that in certain PPA structures, a school can be protected against the volatility of conventional electricity costs. These, because a PPA is a contract structure, it's applicable to projects that can be either on campus or off campus or nearby campus or far away. It's not particular to a location. So I mentioned that we recently did a study, and this study collected data about campuses who are sourcing renewable energy and how they're sourcing it. And what you see here is that by far, as I mentioned, the unbundled RECs are still, in terms of volume and the number of campuses using this strategy, it's the most common strategy. I think of it as kind of a beginner step. It's a way to get involved in the renewable energy market without a very hefty commitment, because you can buy RECs to apply to your greenhouse gas inventory, which is typically the reason people do this, in 1 year chunks. So, it's not a long-term commitment. It's relatively easy to do. I could literally pick up the phone and place a call and buy RECs. So lots of campuses are doing it, and it represents a fairly large volume of electricity relative to other renewable energy strategies. The green bars on this chart, I think, are interesting because what they show is that increasingly campuses are seeking on-site renewable energy solutions. This is typically solar. You can see just in the last 5 years, this study stops at with data in 2014, but our initial data for 2015 showed that this growth was continuing. So for the past 6 years or so, you can see a nice consistent upward march for the number of campuses that are pursuing on-site solar. The much smaller light blue bars, where they just first appear in 2011, and then in 2014 it's up to 14 campuses. These are large-scale off-site renewable energy purchases, and it's a small number of campuses, but it's growing. And what you'll see in the next slide unpacks that a little bit more, which is that the volume of electricity represented by these different strategies is a little bit different than the number of campuses pursuing them. So again, the dark blue is the unbundled RECs, and what you see in higher ed is that the volume of even though the number of campuses has remained more or less steady for the past few years that are buying unbundled RECs, the volume of electricity represented by those purchases is actually slowly declining. The green bar is the on-site solar. So this is a very small wedge here. It represents maybe 10% or less of the total electricity purchased from renewable sources in higher ed, even though the number of campuses is growing very quickly. So lots of campuses doing it, but the volume of electricity that it represents is small. The top light blue bar there, and this is, to me, the most interesting takeaway and opportunity for higher ed in terms of strategies for investing in renewable energy, is that we're quickly approaching 15 or 20% of renewable energy in higher ed is from these large-scale off-site purchases, even though the number of campuses is only 14 out of 240 or so campuses in total that are purchasing renewable energy at all. So it's a very small number of campuses, but a large share of the electricity is represented by each of those deals. So just a few trends here to take away. The number of colleges and universities buying renewable energy has grown by 2,000% in the last 10 years. The amount of, or volume of, renewable energy purchased by those schools has grown more than 30-fold in those 10 years, from about 100,000 megawatt hours in 2006 all the way up to almost 3.3 million megawatt hours last year. Unbundled RECs do remain the most common strategy, but growth there has slowed or declined. On-site solar is growing quickly, but it represents a small total volume of energy, and each project is typically very small, whereas off-site renewable energy purchases are typically twice as large on average compared to either of those other strategies, per transaction. So those off-site purchases are typically structured as power purchase agreements or renewable energy purchase agreements. And again, a renewable energy purchase agreement is simply a contract stipulating a price per kilowatt hour or megawatt hour for power from a specific project for an agreed period of time. One thing that makes this interesting and unique compared to conventional electricity contracts is that, as some of the earlier speakers mentioned, this is a source of electricity where there's no fuel cost. So it's very different from gas or coal because you're not reliant on unknown fluctuations in commodity prices. Instead, you're looking at mostly fixed costs of infrastructure. You know, what does it cost to build the project? Operations and maintenance typically are a very small cost, a very small ongoing cost for both wind and solar. So you're able to know most of the cost up front, and if you can spread that cost out over time, it can result in a very attractive cost of electricity for the PPA buyer. The price can be flat over the term, or it can be staggered, or it can be escalating every year at a predetermined rate. The terms are typically 12 to 25 years. 20 is the most common, but we're now starting to see, and this is an area where Altenex has been actively engaged, is in trying to shorten those terms so that colleges and universities that are reluctant to make very, very long-term commitments, but would like the comfort and stability of a relatively long contract. We've been trying to work with project owners to shorten those terms down to as little as 10 years, and we've been successful in that recently. The projects, as I mentioned, are can be on-site, nearby, or far away. The contract structure is applicable to any project. And you know, the reason this works for a campus, and having executed a number of them myself when I was at American University, you know, one of the things that we liked was the fact that they were long-term and that they locked in our cost for a long period of time, so that we knew exactly what the cost from those projects would be, which you know, allowed for better financial planning. They also were competitive against our existing electricity costs. In fact, on day one, our largest PPA, which was for about 15 megawatts, it beat our conventional electricity price on day one, and it was locked into that price for 20 years. So it was, you know, we saw it as a real financial win right off the bat. Plus, and you know, I think for most colleges and universities in this space, an additional benefit for us, and really the one that was initially driving the process, was that this allowed us to meet our greenhouse gas reduction goals that were outlined in our climate action plan. The benefit to the reason this works for a project owner is that they're looking to finance their project, and a commitment from a customer to purchase their generation for a fixed price over a fixed period of time gives them the certainty that they can use to go to a lender and get very favorable costs of money to build their project, which in turn, you know, helps make the PPA price competitive. So this is my contact information. I think we have a little bit of time for questions now. You know, the one area that I'm interested in exploring more with any school interested is the idea of using the school's own money, either from an endowment or from another budget, to finance a renewable energy project, because we think that school, you know, while PPAs are working very well, they also leave some of the benefit on the table that the school could be accruing itself if it was using its own money. So I will, let's see, turn it back to, actually, Jackie, I think you can just, yeah, so I think I've turned the screen back to you, Jackie.
Well, thank you very much, Chris. That was a lot of good data, and I guess we'll open it up to general questions for all of the panelists currently. We have about 5 minutes for that. I think I'll get us started with a few questions here. You know, maybe this is an elephant in the room question, but this is for all the panelists. Do you see potential shifts in the level of interest of the next incoming administration in clean energy tech, and how are they likely to impact any of the investment opportunities that we've discussed so far?
I can take a stab at that. This is John, and save some time for others. I think a couple things. You said clean energy tech. When I think of clean energy tech, I think of innovation. I think of, you know, ARPA grants. I think of incubators. I think of Dow Chemical funding advanced materials. I think the majority of clean energy tech is probably financed, frankly, inside of companies today. It's not through third-party funds or third-party capital.
Good point, John. Maybe we can expand that to clean energy tech and equities and projects.
You know, on the project side or in the bigger picture, like I think we're looking at an executive branch that is one arm of government, and you know we have executive, federal. We've got different arms of the legislation, and we have state. Today, solar makes up 7% of the renewable energy in the United States. Solar makes up less than 1%. The market for those technologies is enormous. Coal is getting shut down, and it's not because Obama wanted it to be shut down. It's because it's not economic, given the cost of extracting it and burning it, and the pollution. Not even carbon dioxide, just the pollution costs of it are enormous, and they are being valued today. So you've got shutdowns of power plants on a state level. Nuclear power plants are being shut down because of Fukushima. There's no new nuclear on the drawing board in the United States. There's no new coal on the drawing board in the United States, which means the gap is going to be filled by renewables and gas. And gas takes somewhere between 3 to 7 years to develop, and it's actually a very hard development cycle because many people don't want gas power plants in their neighborhoods. They're much more amenable to a solar project. So, you know, I see a lot of saber rattling, but I don't really see a lot of ability to truly undo the momentum that's out there. The second point I would just make is that solar jobs, there are more solar jobs today in the United States than there are natural gas jobs. And any legislative action would absolutely consider that fact. But I'd be curious to hear what others have to say as well.
Well, thanks, John. Maybe we'll get to that, but I have a few specific questions from attendees that we'll address. One, and maybe this is for Chris, in the own and operate model, are there tax equity partners available to the university for smaller scale projects, say 500 kW?
That's a good question. I think it would be hard to find a tax equity partner for a project that small if you were doing it as a one-off. If it was part of a broader portfolio, which is something that we're working to develop, it might be possible. But feel free to get in touch with me directly if you want to follow up in a conversation after the webinar.
Yeah, and in a specific example, I can say that yes, this has been done. If you look in the Clean Energy White Paper, you'll see a profile of Luther College where they had a local college supporter serve as the tax equity investor for a project as small as 20 kW, and then culminated currently in a project of 820 kW in size, and others they're scoping out a 300 or a 3 megawatt project. So possible, but not generally in the large investment space. I'll move to the next one, which is related. Can an alumni owner of an on-site solar project take a charitable contribution when the project is gifted to the university at the end of a PPA term? I can take a shot at that one. The interesting context of there's an interesting context in the contract of a PPA with a third-party tax, let's say a special purpose LLC that's created to take advantage of the tax credit. And that is that in the contract terms, there cannot necessarily be a specified buyout price. It really is about fair market value. And it cannot be specified that a third-party owner will eventually donate the system to the university. However, those two conditions do not limit the ability of the third-party owner to make the donation and to take a charitable contribution following some of the wrinkles in the tax code and some of the limitations of some funding, for example, REAP funding or other types of funding that require long-term ownership of the asset. But yes, it can happen. However, there are restrictions on defining how that happens and the value of the system at the time of signing the PPA contract. Any points of clarification from the panel on that question? We'll get to another question. We'll change tracks here. This is really about engaging the university. The question is, What is the most effective way to convince the investment committee at my university to use our endowment in this way? In the past, I have been warned that this is a slippery slope and could be questioned from a conservative fiduciary view.
I would bring George in if he's available to speak on that topic. You know, I don't see this as a slippery slope at all. These are pure financial decisions. If there's an ESG question on the table, frankly, and I would encourage those folks to just throw out any ESG considerations and just look at any of these investments on their face value. The second part of it is there is a body of evidence which has been produced that that shows right now that incorporating ESG principles, environmental social governance principles, into any sort of investing is only accretive to returns, because you're not looking at, say, just 10 financial metrics. You're looking at 20 metrics, including, you know, very important ones that hit at, you know, how, you know, governance is used in an organization and how employees are treated and social impact, all which are basically reducing risk. And so I think there are two tracks there.
Any other comments from the panel?
I think John's point is exactly the right one. The key here is that these are commercial investment opportunities from the university's perspective that should make and often do make great commercial sense, certainly in energy efficiency, often in renewables. It is the case that universities making those kinds of decisions for commercial reasons also often find that there's terrific opportunities to build a constituency within the university family among students and educators about the work that's going on, the impact of those decisions on the broader environment. And often there's a nice interplay between those decisions and specific departments at the university or college that have a bearing, where the actual academic work has a bearing on the work that's being done. So there are enormous opportunities for collateral advantage, but the decisions can be made purely in commercial terms. We're not suggesting this is something universities need to do. We're suggesting it's something that colleges and universities can often find as very attractive investment opportunities.
Great. Well, thank you, Ken. Thank you, John. Thank you, Chris. We are about 5 minutes over right now, so I think we'll end the web conference for today. Lots of great insights. Again, I would like to remind attendees to please look and download the Clean Energy White Paper, Investing in Clean Energy for Campuses Endowments, from the Intentional Endowments Network. And I'd like to thank the network and organizers for hosting today. And good luck with all of your clean energy investments. Thank you so much.